In terms of citizenship, the last thing, I just thought I'd try and say something about it. One of the things I'm interested in is citizenship in terms of sexual citizenship and issues to do with boundaries, if you like, who belongs and who doesn't, what's inside, what's outside. And I think there's a particularly interesting kind of issue there, which again can kind of relate back to this issue of kind of solidity, certainty, and fluidity and change. And I think there you see kind of this issue to do with, for instance, sadomasochistic citizenship, queer citizenship, challenges to those kind of fixed and very solid notions of citizenship. You see the kind of people who are currently outside, and I think you see the intersection of all sorts of aspects of our identities and the broader socio-political worlds that we live in. And I think one of the things that I've kind of seen across both panels really is this kind of attempt to work between these things. And I think work critically between them. And I think that's one of the things that SIG is particularly interested in doing, is actually trying to engage across these different ideas, across these different strands, and not simply think the new is always better, because I don't think it is, but actually recognise that sometimes there's utility to be found in both old and new. I do mean.
Thank you. Okay. Now for some fun. I mean, there's been more agreement than I might have anticipated, I think, on the panel, but some differences. And it would be really good if you could make comments, ask questions.
Hi, thank you for that. I guess I have questions about boundaries and about...
Can you just say again who you are?
Oh, sorry.
You spoke last time.
I'm Zoe Soujon from LSE. Yeah, so I'm quite interested in the notion of boundaries. And Darren, you said something about sexual citizenship and sort of... and I guess my question is, I mean, I think that, yes, it's absolutely useful and crucial to think about identities, but when you talked about sexual citizenship, part of me is... objects in some ways to the endless division around new kinds of citizenship, new sort of neologisms around, you know, the worker citizen, the social citizen, and I think in some ways this many applies to identities. So my question is, how do you sort of balance that endless dividing around identities and sort of being able to say something meaningful about that? Thank you.
Yeah, if you answer that one now, and then we'll collect up some questions. So while Darren's answering, if you all really think hard, then we'll take a whole range of questions.
I mean, I think that's a really important point. And I think, you know, we're seeing increasing fragmentation of the citizenship project. I think, for me, though, it's a question of, I mean, it's purely a pragmatic question. Where do we draw the line? And I think the issue, for me, is that feminist citizenship... I mean, Ken Plummer has actually talked about intimate citizenship as an attempt to kind of deal with sexual citizenship and feminist citizenship in one go. I think it falls to pieces, quite frankly, because I think it loses what's most important about feminist citizenship and what's most important about sexual citizenship. So for me, those are substantive categories that have sufficient utility and sufficient difference that it's worth holding them separately, but not losing the commonality. I think that's the point. This is the thing about dialectic for me, is that I actually think that they inform each other, and I don't think you can treat them individually. I think, however, there is utility in kind of recognising the difference in them. I should say, you know, obviously I'm drawing a line, and you know that's something I'm kind of reflexively aware of, is that I'm kind of saying, well, okay, I think it's actually important to separate out sexual citizenship from feminist citizenship. But then I'm somewhat reluctant to create a new sadomasochistic citizen. I think that, for me personally, is a step too far, because I think most of the issues that come up there are related to aspects of sexuality and aspects of gender and the intersection between them. And for me, most of the critical issues of citizenship around sadomasochistic citizens, or rather non-citizens, because in fact they don't actually gain most of the rights of citizenship at present in the UK, are to be found by operating at that level. So in a sense, I guess it's pragmatic, but I guess we have to be aware of the way in which we mustn't just kind of hive everything off. So I kind of agree in that sense.
Can I say something?
Yes, sure, of course you can. Please carry on, yeah.
I was just thinking about, there's a sort of slippage, isn't there, between citizenship and identities in what you're saying. Shut up. Whatever it is. It's not me, anyway. in this kind of...
Someone check the mobile interfering very badly with the equipment.
It's not me. I know it's not me this time. It usually is me, but it's not me this time. I've got flustered now. No, one of the things seems to me is about a kind of acknowledging moments of difference. When Darren's saying that there are points of commonality, points of which override those separations, and there seems a difference to me between identities and citizenship in this, and that's they both seem to collide there, because one of the other things that struck me when, actually it's not so much your question, but when Darren was talking, is the I'd like to make a bid for joining Darren in the village, where Sarah already is, obviously, but you know, of the phenomenological accounts, because one of the things about difference that really struck me when you were talking is that, because I've used de Beauvoir's lived body, which comes from Merleau-Ponty, but it's, you know, where is that in terms of that's feminist then, not phenomenologist, and one of the big things about being on the outside when you're doing research, like I have been in boxing, is that you acknowledge situatedness, and what I've observed from the literature is that insiders don't acknowledge situatedness. And that's one of the points about areas of commonality and difference, which relates to methodology, is the ways in which one is positioned in doing the research and how difference is acknowledged or not acknowledged.
Okay. Right, we've got a few questions. Yeah, Caroline.
A question for Helen.
Sorry, could you just say your name, please?
My name's Elizabeth Barnett, and I'm retired from the OU, very happily. I have to say that. My question was for Helen, and I was really interested in what you had to say, and I found it all very resonant.
Helen.
But I wondered if you had looked in your studies at the experience of only children as a comparator or not, because while everything you say is you know, strikes a chord, only children, what happens to them in terms of identity formation and relationships?
Okay, we had
A very short answer, I'm afraid.
Oh, sorry. Could we just take a few questions? Yeah.
I'm going to be deliberately antagonistic
Could you
a
say?
bit. I'm Wendy Stainton-Rogers from Health and Social Care. I don't like the fluffy bunny solution in which you say, well, let's get the best of everything. And I think Stuart's question is a very good litmus test of that I think that there are some approaches to identity which, while being perfectly legitimate approaches, because they're largely psychosocial or subjective or whatever, they're perfectly legitimate intellectual endeavours, really don't help very much in terms of structural inequality, for example. Whereas there are others which, as a psychologist, I would term social identities, in which it's a question of to which group do you owe affiliation, or to which group are you seeking to join, or whatever, which I think says some very useful things about inequalities, particularly inequalities in a world that is fragmenting in terms of things like social class, though I do think we forget social class a lot. So I'd like to challenge the panel, particularly Darren perhaps, and say, do you think that identity or identities is a better way of approaching things like structural inequality?
Thank you. Over here, a question.
Yes, all right. I'm Jeff Huismans. I was on the panel before. I'm in politics and international studies. I have a question that tries to move away from identities, but something else, and goes back to Fukuyama, which is when concepts travel, the meaning changes. And the way I guess what Fukuyama, I haven't read the article, is struggling with, is that identities in politics and international politics specifically goes hand in hand with the cultural reading of politics and the social. And so I was wondering...